you talk about thin desires and thick desires, or I think you've called them worldly desires, and then the spiritual desires, the deep desires. And of course, if we're thinking about models, and I think one of the compelling messages in your book and in Rene's work and in mimetic theory is that we're mimetic anyway. So we're going to be adopting models, choosing models. And so one of the questions is, who are the models? Where are you going to look to models? We have a freedom, and you talk about nurturing or meditating, focusing on those really important desires that last versus those ones that are thin. Do you want to say a little bit more about those two ideas that you've explored in the second part of the book?
Sure. I've grappled for a very long time with how to distinguish different types of mimetic desire. I don't think that all mimetic desire is alike, and it sort of exists on some kind of a spectrum. You could think of it, there are some things that are hyper mimetic, and there are other things that are less mimetic. Usually our motivations are mixed. I know some people that bought Bitcoin, for instance, for what seems like purely mimetic reasons. They didn't do an ounce of research. They just sort of bought because everybody else wanted it. And I know other people that bought Bitcoin who spent hours and hours sort of looking into the cryptography and looking into the reasons, and can make a very good case why this makes sense and is better than fiat currency. And perhaps those people had less mimetic motivations than the people that bought without having done that. Maybe there's a little more reason involved, right? So, you get two people do the same thing, and one may be doing it for more mimetic reasons than the other. And, on the other side of the spectrum, you think, I do think that and the Girardians disagree. But I think I can imagine a world in which there are desires that, are almost very little mimetic, or perhaps not mimetic at all. In the spiritual tradition that I come from, there's basically it's been said that saints have had locutions, or sort of had direct, heard a direct calling from God, right? That would be an instance of just unmediated sort of calling or desire, right? This is your desire. So, I think to think of that as mimesis as existing on a spectrum is helpful for me. And, as you can tell from the book, I sometimes I like to put things into funny phrases or coin words to help me just as shorthand. So for me, the thin desires were kind of the highly mimetic desires that are fleeting. And the thick desires are the ones that I've been cultivating for a very long period of time. And thick desires, by the way, are not always necessarily good. I could develop a thick desire for a vice. But in the context of the book, I speak of them as hopefully positive things. And from a theological perspective, I relate thick desires very much to the question of calling and the question of vocation. And I have, sort of come to the conclusion that, God can very much work in and through my mimetic desire, right? And can call me through other people. And very much, and that's a beautiful thing, right? I live in a material world, and I have people that are in my life for a reason. And in some sense, my mimetic desire, even perhaps my negative mimetic desire, can all things can work out to the good, right? All things are kind of possible. So we're on this journey of life, and on this journey of discovering who we are, what we're meant to do. And I've had people in my life that I've at one point, just to tell a very quick story, in my late 20s, I realized that I had the chance to choose what kind of models of desire were going to be influential in my life. And I decided to exercise some agency and to step outside of the startup world that I was in, where all of my models were just other entrepreneurs, other hustlers, highly ambitious people, kind of people that, just, you know, work 80 hours a week and instead of sleeping, play poker in Vegas, because I was living in Vegas at the time. And, you know, I was very intentional about choosing models that were outside of that world. You know, models of holiness, you know, people that I really admired for their virtues, for their family life. And these were extremely positive models of desire for me that in a sense began to sort of pull me into a different kind of world, a different kind of lifestyle and existence. And, you know, I was being mimetic. You know, I use mimesis in a powerful way, even though I didn't know what it was at the time. But that's sort of how I've come to think about vocation, that it's in and through our mimetic desire, in fact, that we eventually understand how we're being called.
So perhaps the things that resonate the most, that endure, are desires that fruitful. Perhaps one of the other tactics, they're you know, they're all interesting, but one of the other ones you talk about is investing in deep silence, and that sounds like this phase that you'd move to after Vegas. You know, you talk about spending some time in retreat. Do you want to say a little bit more about that in terms of mimetic desire, or the question of models, or attention? I mean, attention today seems to be such a precious or difficult thing to attain often. I mean, I mentioned to you the other day, I think it's an Andrew Sullivan quote, but the suggestion is that it's not hedonism in the church that's the great problem, but distraction. And you know, this is something, you know, we all get distracted on our phones. There are so many things that bombard us. We live in a world where there are models. It's a blizzard, you know. I mean, Andrew Sullivan has a great article called, I think it's I Used to Be Human, and he writes really carefully about that experience of just being bombarded by models and influences all the time. And one of the suggestions in your book is to come around to a kind of centering prayer, or a centering silence. Do you want to say a little bit more about that experience?
Yeah, well, you know, the attentiveness is really key. I hadn't heard that quote by Andrew Sullivan, but I think it's right. It's certainly been my experience. And, you know, when I look at my spiritual life and my journey, it's the distractions that are the biggest battle for me, usually. I believe it was Mary Oliver. I'll get the quote wrong, but she said something to the effect of, you know, attentiveness is, you know, always the first step in prayer. You know, the link between attention and prayer itself is very strong and very deep. You know, sometimes just being attentive is a form of prayer. Sometimes.
Yeah. It sounds like Simone Weil. She says something to that effect. It's a beautiful connection.
Yeah. Maybe I'm misattributing, or maybe they've both said something. I wouldn't be surprised if they both said something.
It's a beautiful realization. Yeah,
it really is. So that's what I was getting at with the silence. Being attentiveness to the deep desires of my heart, perhaps the desires that God has planted in my heart. And it takes the silence to sort of rid myself of the distraction and the noise. You know, I've been taking I try to take a week-long or at least 5-day silent retreat every year. I've been doing it for a decade, with the exception of last year. Long story. And it's I've gotten to the point where I don't know what I would do without it, because it takes me 3 days. It's actually scary for me, because it takes me 3 days just for the noise to fully recede from my mind, you know, from my heart. And it's very obvious when it happens. I wake up on day 4 and, you know, I just had crazy dreams the night before. It's like, you know, it's like when you leave like a rock concert and you've got a ringing in your ears and it takes 3 days for the ringing to go away. That's how I feel with social media and the blizzard that I'm in on a daily basis, that I'm immersed in. And what it did for me, what it continues to do for me, and you don't need to take a week. You could do this even in 15 minutes, is better than none. Helps to be attentive to what our desires are in the first place.
Mm.
And especially, looking back on our lives, this is a very Augustinian kind of confessions type exercise, but looking back on our lives and understanding what our desires were at a young age, and sort of tracing them, tracking them. How did they change? When did they change? Did they change for the better? Did I lose a great desire that I once had? An admirable, noble desire, why did I lose that? These are really important questions to ask. And, that takes attentiveness, and the prerequisite for attentiveness is for me is the silence, right? That's where God speaks to me. That's where I'm able to get in touch with what's going on inside, that sense of interiority, which is really not a habit of being that many people in the modern world have. And I'm somebody who didn't go on social media until my senior year of college. I can't imagine growing up with it from a young age these days.
Luke, thank you so much.
Thank you, Matthew, for the conversation.
Blessings to you. Thank you, Luke.
You too.
Cheers.